Good evening, everybody. Let me just get the protocols out of the way. Honorable C. Sandra Husbands, Minister of Trade. Honorable Edmund Hinkson. Honorable Marshall Cadell, Minister in the Ministry of Economic Affairs. Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, Dr. Mukhisa Kituyi. Members of the Diplomatic Corps, Dean Justin Robinson, other deans, deputy deans, and heads of department, specially invited guests, other members of the campus community, students, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen. Again, good evening. On behalf of the Sridhar Ramphal Center and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade, with whom we are collaborating to host this event, let me extend the warmest of welcomes to our beloved Keyville campus. In particular, let me welcome esteemed Minister in the Ministry of Foreign Trade, Honorable Sandra Husbands, and our very special guest tonight, Secretary General Kituyi, to whom I extend a Swahilian greeting, and I hope I get it right, Karibi. My name is Neil Paul, and I am the director of the Sridhar Ramphal Center for International Trade Law, Policy and Services, which we affectionately call the SRC. The SRC is the hub at UWI for all things trade related, and we pride ourselves on being the premier institution for the region responsible for training the young and not so young, the young and not so young minds of the region in the multidisciplinary discipline of trade policy. The UWI, and in particular the SRC, has had links with the UNCTAD for a long time. The Sridhar Ramphal Center has been a core member of the UNCTAD Virtual Institute for about 15 years. The Virtual Institute is UNCTAD's program to support academia. It was launched somewhere in June 2004 with universities representing 5 countries, and by August 2016, the Virtual Institute had grown into a global network of 131 universities and research centers in about 64 countries. The SRC has also grown special links to UNCTAD because of our annual study tour that our master's students undertake to Geneva as part of their Masters in International Trade Policy course every year. For our students, one of the highlights of their year-long course is the trip to Geneva, Switzerland, where UNCTAD and other trade-related organizations are based, to learn firsthand about trade policy from trade practitioners who practice it every day. And every year, without fail, UNCTAD extends a kind and welcoming hand by organizing guest lectures by its professional staff and educating and entertaining our students with great zeal. We have even managed to obtain internships for our students in past years, so we hope that this year will bring us some internships. Let me take this opportunity to publicly thank UNCTAD for its continuing support of the MITP students of the SRC, and we count that the customary hospitality when we knock again at your door this year in as early as May. It is no small honor that we are therefore hosting tonight the Secretary General of one of the most important global institutions in the world for supporting developing countries' integration into the global economy. We welcome you, Mr. Kituyi, this time to our corner of the globe, and look forward keenly to your remarks on how United Nations Committee on Trade and Development has and will continue to assist Caribbean developing countries, the Caribbean's developing countries in that integration process, bearing in mind the current realities of trade that befalls us. But before we turn to hearing your remarks, we have a very distinguished line of persons to speak tonight. I would now like to welcome first the Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, Dr. Justin Robinson, to deliver opening remarks on behalf of the Principal, Professor Eugene Barreto, who is unable to attend tonight because of a previous engagement. Dean Robinson.
Okay, thank you very much, Chairman. Good evening, all. Protocol having been established. I enjoy saying that because it's usually a long list. In its mission statement, UWI says that our mission is to advance learning, create knowledge, and foster the positive transformation of the Caribbean and the wider world. Tasked with such a vision and being the premier tertiary education institution of the English-speaking Caribbean, we see that it's essential that we are at the forefront of discussions around trade and development issues. As island nations, trade is absolutely essential to economic well-being in the Caribbean. Sometimes, you hear no man is an island, and we forget that we are small islands, and trade is absolutely essential. Over the last few decades, we've witnessed dramatic transformations in the international trading environment, not all to our advantage, but it's essential that as a region that we are aware of these changes, that we have the capabilities to adapt, and not only adapt, but also to use our offices and connections to help to shape that environment. So it's in that spirit that UWI sees collaborations such as this evening's lecture through the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and UNCTAD as being vital and crucial as we navigate our way in this very important but very dynamic space. Tonight, we are particularly pleased to host the Secretary General of UNCTAD. On behalf of the principal, we give you a warm Cave Hill welcome. UNCTAD has a long history in the region, offering technical assistance and capacity building in old as well as new trade areas, including trade facilitation, harmonization of regional competition law and policies, and more recently, hence my attempt to give my remarks from my cell phone, UNCTAD has embarked on initiatives that provide the framework for e-commerce, legal harmonization across the region, and the use of technologies such as artificial intelligence to help facilitate trade negotiations for small island states. We at the UWI would like to announce our willingness to support UNCTAD in this, as well as to partner with you in the execution of these important new initiatives. We offer ourselves as a vehicle and a partner to UNCTAD as we go down this road. We look forward to your address this evening, and we hope this is the first step in a partnership towards the revitalization of Caribbean societies. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Robinson. And now I would like you all to help me welcome to the podium the Honorable Sandra Husbands, who herself is a graduate of the SRC's premier Masters in International Trade Policy program, who was among the first cohorts of the course. Clearly, she has done the SRC very proud, and she will now offer some thoughts tonight from her unique perspective as the minister responsible for setting the course of the Barbadian trade agenda going forward.
Thank you so much, Mr. Master of Ceremonies. The Honorable Minister of Home Affairs, Mr. Edmund Hinkson, the Minister in the Ministry of Economic Affairs, Ms. Marcia Cadell, Dame Billy Miller, Ambassador Plenipotentiary, Secretary General of the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, Dr. Kituyi, members of the Diplomatic Corps, Dean of the Faculty of Social Sciences, Dr. Justin Robinson, other deans, deputy deans, and heads of department, specially invited guests, other members of the campus community, members of the media, and ladies and gentlemen. It is certainly my pleasure to be here at Cave Hill on this occasion. I'm really honored to be among you so that we can engage on matters which are not only critical for the prosperity of Barbados, but for all other small, vulnerable economies as a whole. So I wish to join others in welcoming Dr. Kituyi to Barbados. Secretary General, I look forward to hearing you. I look forward to discussing matters with you and hearing what thoughts you're going to share with us today. It also gives me great pleasure to welcome back, albeit temporarily, Dr. Pamela Coke Hamilton, who is a true daughter of the Caribbean and who is employed at the United Nations Conference for Trade and Development. It has been the pleasure of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade to partner with the university in this venture, and we look forward to continued collaboration in the area of international trade. This evening, I've chosen to share a few thoughts on the challenges being faced by small, vulnerable economies in an uncertain trading environment. Trade and development, ladies and gentlemen, are the foundations upon which poverty eradication, social cohesion, and long-lasting prosperity have their genesis. These are the fundamental goals of all governments, but they elude many developing countries, especially the small and vulnerable among them. There are, however, some international institutions, such as UNCTAD, which stand ready to assist our developing states in a myriad of economic development areas. It is no small secret that our economies face challenges in the area of climate change. For instance, this region is prone to natural disasters which have increased in capacity over the recent past. We have seen the impact of such disasters, which can set back development goals of small economies in the space of 24 hours. Climate change must be taken seriously because we're all in danger of becoming climate refugees. The graduation policies of some countries are also a cause for concern. Access to finance to support development needs is constrained by the policies of some of our development partners. We applaud those who continue to support us without these conditionalities. The strict reliance on GDP as the main determinant for access to finance must be addressed. And we commend UNCTAD for its work in this area, and I want to be able to pledge Barbados' full support in any effort to address this issue of graduation based on GDP. We are living in a world which is constantly being reshaped by decisions taken, more often than not, by a select few. Occasionally, we as small states are party to these decisions. On other occasions, we are mere bystanders. What is clear, however, is that some of these decisions adversely affect the economic development of our small states, Barbados obviously included. It sometimes appears as though we are being penalized for the advances we as countries have made in the face of strenuous global pressures. This pressure has become even more acute given the advent of the World Trade Organization and the operations of two of its major doctrines, trade liberalization and non-discrimination. As a result of these two critical components of international trade, the margins we enjoy in our preferential export trade are slowly diminishing. This is a matter of concern to small developing states such as Barbados as we strive to become competitive in the global market. Barbados and other small developing states in the region are also deeply concerned about the challenges to our international financial services sector. Reiterate that our tax system is transparent. We have sought to comply with the demands of our partners who have challenged us on this basis. When one assesses these global trends over time and marry them with yet another blow to our economies, the withdrawal of correspondent banking relationships, many may wonder how we as small states will survive. Many of our businesses, both in Barbados and in the region, have been hard hit by the withdrawal of correspondent banking. This action alone by these large commercial banks can certainly destroy the economy of a country in very short order. So again, I pose the question, how do we as small states survive? This is a question which I'm constantly asked and which I choose to answer in this way. We as small states have no choice but to meet these challenges frontally. We must look for avenues through which we can maneuver and we must seek out development partners who understand our challenges as small developing states. We must seek out development partners who are willing to assist us both financially and with technical assistance. We need partners who will make interventions for us in the right fora. And we also must fully develop the potential of our people and give them the confidence and the boldness to operate on a large global stage. And this is how we are going to find our niche in the world. Our citizens expect nothing less of us than the relentless search for new avenues for us to thrive and grow. In the multilateral arena, we have always sought out like-minded groups to support us in those areas of trade which matter greatly to us. But before I go further, let me state clearly here today that Barbados remains deeply committed to the fundamental principles of the multilateral trading system. We remain confident in the system to regulate all global trade matters and adjudicate all trade disputes in a fair manner, irrespective of the size or wealth of the country. Unfortunately, the multilateral system is at a crossroad, and there will be a need for the membership to consult among themselves as to how best their concerns can be resolved. Let me state that Barbados stands ready through its mission in Geneva to lend assistance and its voice to any discussion which is being crafted to break the deadlock in all of its forms at the WTO. We believe that this institution and its mandate on trade, especially the Doha Development Round, are too important for developing states to be held in abeyance for so long. There are some who now speak about the irrelevance of the multilateral trading system and have embraced the trend towards bilateral trade. Indeed, quite a large number of bilateral trade agreements are being signed, and this can arguably be linked to the slow-moving process in the WTO. So a solution must be found. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm very concerned about what can befall Barbados and our CARICOM neighbors due to these changing global dynamics. We must be seen as vulnerable small states who are constrained not just by our size, but by our resource capabilities as well. And despite the fact that we do not have the resources of large developed countries, rarely would you see us lament over the fact. Many small states simply face the challenges and seek to resolve it in the best way possible. We must make the best of the resources which we have. The characteristics of small states dictate that we be treated differently, hence the continued existence of special and differential treatment. Our limited resources, low product differentiation, and great susceptibility to natural disasters must be acknowledged. UNCTAD remains one of the few institutions which appreciates the vulnerabilities of our states. They've been at the forefront of development in small developing states now for many years. This is where international organizations such as UNCTAD are needed by developing states such as ours. And this is where we need such organizations to champion our cause. So let me thank the Secretary General for the sterling job he's done so far, not only for Barbados, but for the large number of developing states which need to build capacity in areas such as trade, economic development, and climate change. I also wish to thank UNCTAD for the support which has been provided to Barbados in the areas of the sustainable use of marine resources, e-trade readiness, and electronic commerce strategy. Ladies and gentlemen, in closing, I would like to leave you with one thought. The future of Barbados and other small vulnerable economies depends on what we do today. The future must be shaped today. We have institutions such as UNCTAD which are willing to help us shape that future. Let us grab a hold of that offer. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Minister Husbands. And now I would like to call on Ms. Pam Coke-Hamilton, the Director of UNCTAD's Trade and Communities Division, to introduce the Secretary General, but before he takes the podium to give his speech. First, let me say a few words about Pam, although I know she doesn't want me to. prior to her appointment at UNCTAD, Pam was the executive director at Caribbean Export Development Agency, where she made quite a positive difference to the way the Caribbean marketed itself and its products in international markets. But more intimately, we at the SRC know Pam as the first director of the Shrida Framphal Center, when she introduced trade policy to the Cave Hill campus through a short course on trade policy, and then the Cave Hill, the flagship Masters in International Trade policy to the Cave Hill campus, which by all estimations has defied all odds. We are pleased to be now teaching the 15th cohort of the Masters program. So thank you very much, Pam. I'm sure you will be an asset to the UNCTAD just as you have been to us here at the UWI and Caribbean Export. Please.
Thank you very much. Good morning. Good night, everybody. I'm sorry I had a bit of a rough go of it. We had to change airports and my baggage didn't arrive, and so if this dress looks weird, it's because it's not my usual style. But, you know, it's what I could find in Gatwick, so it works. But thank you very much for turning out on a Saturday night. I just wanted to say it's an honor for us to be here tonight to welcome Secretary General Kituyi. You know, normally we're asked to read this, you know, thing that says who we are. What we did, where you were born, and I could read all of that. And he really has an incredible history as a development specialist and as an economist. He is also an academic. He has led the Governance Institute in Kenya. He has been head of the EPA negotiations for Eastern Africa, and his history speaks for itself. But what I wanted to say about Dr. Kituyi is that, first of all, he's a visionary. He understands the issues that affect developing countries intimately. And he breathes it and lives it every day in what he does and who he speaks to and how he speaks. I remember when I was packing up to leave to go to Geneva, I found a book that I had held for a very long time. It was the 20-year book of UNCTAD from 1964 to 1984. And I decided to reread it in order to understand where I was going. It would be helpful since I'd accepted the job. But Secretary General Kituyi understands intimately why UNCTAD was formed. He's a true believer, and there are very few true believers left in terms of what development is about, where we should be going, and how we're going to face the multilateral challenges of not just the region, but internationally. The multilateral trading system is literally falling apart. He will tell you it's suffering from organ failure, multiple organ failure, right, Dr. Kituyi? And these are things that he's intimately involved in. He's also willing to push the envelope and to be a cutting-edge leader in terms of engagement with the private sector, in terms of Alibaba, in terms of e-commerce. He's launched the e-commerce week in Africa, and he's willing, even though I'm not supposed to tell him that, to do it in the Caribbean, which is great. Thank you, Dr. But I just wanted to say how honored I am that he agreed to come to Barbados and to the region and to share his thoughts on the way forward and what we need to be doing and how we need to focus, to look at the specific issues affecting small island developing states, what matters to us, the issues, climate change, vulnerability, endogenous and exogenous shocks, and the whole plethora of issues that we know we face. So, without further ado, I am very, very pleased and honored to welcome His Excellency Secretary General Dr. Kituyi to the stand. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pamela. The Honorable Minister for International Trade, Honorable Minister of Home Affairs, Honorable Minister in the Ministry of Economy, Dean, the Faculty of Social Sciences, Director of the SCRC, Excellencies, members of the diplomatic corps, members of the academic community of the University of the West Indies and of the SRC, and particularly those who are on the journey on international trade policy, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. When I came here, I had an idea I was going to talk about some things, which it took the whole of 10, 15 minutes for Neil Paul, Joseph Robinson, and Ms. Husbands to completely put them in a way that I cannot even pretend I can do. They have put out the challenge of the Caribbean, they have put out the partnership with UNCTAD, and now I have to find something clever enough to say for the next 15 minutes. But before I do so, I just wanted to express on my behalf and on behalf of my colleague, Pamela, our appreciation for the invitation and the possibility to share a few thoughts with you, to experience a land I've always wanted to come to. This morning I told another audience that in my privileged travels, I've been to 118 countries before I got to go to Barbados. It was long in the coming, and I'm very glad to be here. As mentioned by my predecessors, we're living at an interesting and challenging moment for multilateralism. Interesting because it requires new thinking, new interpretation of what is happening around us. Challenging because gains and benefits that were being taken for granted cannot be taken for granted anymore. The dramatic changes in the global geopolitical environment rewrite the architecture around which we've been fashioning our policy advice. Phenomena that we sometimes want to wish away as passing clouds seem to portend badly even for the medium and longer term. That individuals who associate with certain uncertainties may disappear longer than the uncertainties they create. Early this week, I was addressing the European Parliament in Brussels. And in my discussion with them, I shared something that I think is important I also share here. That until fairly recently, those of us who are ardent believers in the multilateral system, who believe that global challenges require global solutions, took it for granted that multilateralism is good, that everybody reasonably understands that multilateralism is good, and if it gets into any problems, we are able to sit down and see how to solve those problems. And so, when WTO was starting to have some problems, we could understand that there were some problems. But the longer the problems survived, the more we saw that the problem was not even exclusively institutional, that the ground is shifting before us just as we're watching. If I may just say a few things about that before I go to a few other areas. Yes, my colleague referred to my statement I made recently at the World Government Summit in Dubai, that WTO as a major institution for trade and development, particularly trade policy, trade rules making and dispute resolution, is having major challenges. But all these challenges are being reduced to a vague notion called reform. And the reform of the WTO is like an African elephant. Everybody who is blindfolded comes and touches, and the part they touch tells them what they define as the elephant. So those who touch the tail think that the elephant is like a fiber. Those who touch the tusk think it is like a tree trunk. Those who touch the ivory think it's like bones. Because if you ask developing country trade politicians in Geneva, what's the problem with WTO? They tell you it is not keeping the promise of Uruguay. We were promised in the Doha round that this is a development round, and that the priorities of developing countries were going to be the priority of the whole institution. And that before any other agenda is developed, we have to exhaust the menu of what is primarily important to us, which includes improved market access, strengthening special and differential treatment, building capacity for structural transformation in order to utilize export-led growth to build livelihoods. If you ask the emerging economies, they will tell you there are issues that are more urgent than what was happening when agriculture became such a controversial issue in the negotiation. And for them, the first reason why they want to move away from agriculture is countries like South Korea want to be treated as if they are developing countries when it comes to agriculture negotiation. And it's not accidental. In the year 2005, I was the chair of the agriculture negotiations for WTO Ministerial in Hong Kong. And the Minister of Agriculture and the Minister of Trade of Korea came to me and they were saying, please, you should understand our agriculture is very vulnerable, and in agriculture we are really a developing country. But of course, at every major WTO agriculture negotiation, there's always a risk of a Korean farmer committing suicide. And they did that in the Hong Kong meeting, I remember. So they want to spotlight on some other thing. If you ask India, what's the problem with WTO? They will tell you the problem with WTO is that it's refusing to put down in long-term rules the commitment that we have to have special stock holdings in agriculture because of the vulnerabilities of our farmers, to institutionalize subsidies for consumers. If you ask European Union, what is the problem with the WTO? Say there are a number of different problems, but the two main problems are, one, China cannot pretend it is the same as Haiti. It must accept that some of the special differential treatment it got at entry must now be shared to take on responsibilities as a more developed trading nation. If you ask USA, it has two voices. One voice is that get rid of this special differential thing. And in addition to that, importantly, get rid of this nonsense that every little country has the same voice as strong countries. They're just using that voice. The consensus thing is being used to slow us down until nothing's happening in WTO. So that's one level. A second level, which is more, this is more like the Secretary of the Treasury, Mnuchin, and the former Secretary of State. But increasingly the ones who are in power, Bolton, Lighthizer, and Pence, and if you listen to them, their sense is we have urgent things to deal with. We have to curb the rising power of China. Institutions like WTO are just a nuisance waste of time. They are in the way of progress. If you listen to American academics, they tell you another different story. Theirs is WTO was an institution which was created when nations traded with nations. So a company from America was helped by the American government to have market access in China. But today, trade is not between nations. Sometimes different segments of the same multinational corporations trade with each other around the world. That since the rise of the proper transnational cooperation, the production process is denationalized. So a product represents intellectual property rights of one country, component manufacture of a second country, final assembly and packaging of a third country. So the notion that you say America is negotiating with China about trade in iPhones is as ridiculous as can get. So the notion of countries negotiating with each other on trade is 20th century mentality. But all these people, if you tell them, how can we deal with your problem? They say, reform WTO. What is this bringing to the fore? That the time out being called by Washington today is a moment of realization by all of us that actually incremental challenges to the inefficient way of making rules and dispute resolution, incremental problems of developing countries stuck with the trade of goods of the 20th century, while the main dominant force in international trade are moving to actually not even component manufacture, but non-manufacturing services are along the value chain. That value has moved from the actual making of products and fabrication to intellectual property rights and intangibles, like pre-production design work, like the logistics management, like surveys on consumer satisfaction with the product, and post-sale services. They account much more than the cost of manufacturing and fabricating to make the product. And yet rules are still stuck with the dynamics of the making of the product. Most importantly, that there is no way you can resolve all the different components of WTO needs reform unless there's sufficient political will to do so. What is the challenge about that? Number one, the main players are increasingly moving away from WTO to go to bilateral and plurilateral negotiations for issues of importance to them. The best example of saying this is the rising tide of negotiating rules on e-commerce, which is being driven not by consensus building and not even pretending that it will be through consensus building and the normal WTO rules, but through the coalition of the willing, setting informal rules, filing the resolution with the Secretariat of WTO, and de facto making those the rules. That is similar to something that we had before. It was called GATT. The first time that the world looked at disciplining rule-making in trade in favor of inclusion for developing countries was an initiative in Cuba, in Havana, which died on the floor of Congress in the United States and was replaced by GATT. And what GATT basically said is, let the powerful sit together, look at what rules are necessary, in a gentlemanly way, agree on those rules, and the rest of the world will be thankful forever that they are allowed to use the rules we have agreed upon. In fact, it is the injustices of the GATT arrangement that led to an over-celebration of WTO. But now we're living at a momentous time when even that WTO is due for reform, but I'm afraid it will be reformed to look more like GATT than the Havana Agreement. It will be steps backwards in inclusion. That is a challenge. Americans are ready for that because it's not just that they have a tenant of State House, of the White House right now, who likes the politics of deals and breaks all the rules, but because the center has shifted. The distrust of multilateralism and the declining appetite for inclusive solution making has been growing up before Trump arrived on the stage. He may represent the most bold way of saying it, but some of us have this sense that after Trump America will still be taking baby steps towards multilateralism, particularly on trade. It can do so on other things, where it knows that its interests are better served by the collective. It is likely to do that. In my discussions with the European Parliament on Tuesday this week, I come away with a very clear impression that even in Europe, the appetite to defend multilateralism is declining. While the parties of the left are still engaged and willing to engage, the mainstream of government in the European Union right now has much more time for bilateral negotiations of free trade agreement with Japan, with South Korea, and even with China, than looking at how to embrace a differential treatment for developing countries, the burdens of reforming an institution where every little country can veto the progress you want to make. So we are seeing who are remaining to shoulder the faith in multilateralism. It's increasingly the liberal order, the intellectuals, and the governments and policy advocates from developing countries. Where does that leave us? It leaves us with two specific challenges. One, we must still be aware that whatever market access infrastructure we're going to be embracing, we are too small to negotiate market access as individual entities. You know, we have different scales of small. In Kenya, I say we are small, but Kenya, with 50 million people, is slightly bigger than the Caribbean. And I was just thinking, the Europeans are even having declining appetite for ACP. The impression coming through as we prepare for the next round of post-Cotonou negotiation is, first of all, they're saying, you know, we cannot permanently carry countries that want to negotiate with us. That we give them a secretariat in Brussels and we have to pay for their staff to be in Brussels to negotiate with us is a burden that is not sustainable. So you are going to see in the next few years, perhaps in the next 1 or 2 years, a substantial reduction in the staff, in the size of the delegation to the ACP headquarters of the African, Caribbean, and Pacific countries. But beyond that, I think there will be deliberate effort to separate regions. The EPA configuration was just a first step. There will now be basically a phase when some key players will want to retire the whole notion of ACP. And of course, for them, the most direct and immediate benefit is negotiating with you on a retail market reduces your demands and your voice. If you negotiated with them on a wholesale market, you'll have a higher voice and ability to push in slightly larger demands. On this one, at least, one of the main challenges that we're going to we're going to confront in the coming period is how the public intellectuals, government officials, and forward-thinking policy advisors in the countries that today are ACP countries find a way to compensate for the very concerted efforts that are going to be pushed at them. I attended a ministerial meeting of ACP in Lome, Togo last year, where a resolution was being presented that it had been made at the summit of Africa Union that Africa was going to negotiate as one configuration. And I listened in and called President Kagame, was then the chair of Africa Union, said, what is behind this? You are the chair of Africa Union and you want on your watch to dismantle ACP when you most need it. It was ill-advised sense of demonstrating that Africa is trying to integrate together. But I think the direction it's going to go is twofold. One, Africa is moving very fast to seek to integrate. The ambitious continental free trade area has received ratifications from 22 countries. It's just remaining 3 or 4 countries to come into force. But you know, it is as difficult as Caribbean. You can declare on paper that you're integrating, but in physical activity, in the flows of trade in services and goods, in the political commitment to shared action and space, the results are slightly different from the declaration. But I think it doesn't take away from the importance, even politically, of the Caribbean saying we will stand with one voice. We are going through difficult times. We have experienced different, asymmetrical integration process between Eastern Caribbean and the rest. But it doesn't take away from the political importance of integration. Because it's only when you are declaring politically your commitment towards an integrated process that you can engage others with shared challenges to speak with a common voice. When you domesticate into your region the distrust that is being sown deliberately by those who benefit from your weakness, you reduce your ability to talk about your challenges as a group with others in similar situation. I'll give an example of the seeds. My organization for a long time has been seeking to do for seeds what it succeeded in doing for LDCs, which is to say, can we create an international regime, first in the United Nations, then go to the financial institutions, that recognizes the special, unique challenges and vulnerabilities of seeds. There is no clear opposition to this proposal, except for political reasons. The countries configured as seeds have been embracing partnerships, some countries which are not islands. And they do not have the political will to tell them now you are not one of us. And so that even the preference givers are not ready to share those preferences to those territories that are not islands. Just like when Seychelles and Mauritius were leading the effort about the green economy, not blue economy, and they found the main supporter for their effort was Indonesia. They hold meetings, they convene meetings, Indonesia is in the play. Now you cannot ask the US and European Union to give preferences to Indonesia as it gives to Mauritius and Vanuatu. But for political reasons, they cannot disown them in the middle of meetings. So we've been having this tactical challenge. How can we keep the goodwill with those your friends, but tell them that actually you should not be in the house on this one? Which is critically important to make the next steps. And to my mind, it's the main hurdle that has stood in the way of getting recognition of the status of seeds as status, because of your special vulnerabilities. Because you are on the front line of the consequences of our collective global action, in global warming, in plastic pollution of the seas, in intensity of recurrent calamities, climate-related calamities, and the extent of damage that is caused to them, and therefore diminished resilience. You have this uniqueness, but the political configuration sometimes has been causing a major hurdle and challenge that even the very best efforts by your friends kind of land on a hard territory for the time being. But there are other areas we cannot just paint the world as place of pessimism. To my mind, a number of things are enduring evidence that the future is not as bleak as that. The collective commitment that sustainable prosperity is only possible when we eradicate extreme poverty in all parts of the world. That message from September 2015, SDG Agenda Resolution, remains, it may be sometimes a bit latent, but it remains at the core of certain thinking, still important among important players. I have seen the world go through an extremely hostile phase. when identity politics has overrun economic rationality, when the sense of, for example, Brexit, the fear of uncontrolled migration is confronting the reality of economic disruption in a way that identity politicians did not address. At a speech at the House of Commons, I can share with you this 3 weeks ago, I mentioned that we were having a joke going the rounds that the Israelites left Egypt under the leadership of Moses and wandered for 40 years before crossing the Jordan River, crossing Sinai in 40 years, a distance which a camel can take 40 days to cross. And the explanation is they were clear of where they were going away from, but they had no uniform idea of where they were trying to go. And that if the Brexit is hitting the skids, it's because identity politics created a majority of desire to get out of Brussels, but it never defined where to go when you get out of Brussels. If there is one lesson that seems to be growing in Europe, that after the British experience, there's not likely to be any other country which will attempt to leave the European Union. And some even think that the low point in American leadership of the world of liberal values may be the high noon of resurgence of internationalism. That from identity politics, the pendulum is swinging to an embrace that we are good because we stand for those values that have characterized us good, what has defined us to the world as something to aspire to. If it works, maybe there might be a silver lining on the phenomenon of the past 2 years. But most importantly for us, the strides of technology are calling upon us to readjust our own thinking about who we are and where we're going. To some, the fourth industrial revolution remains offshore. But if you look at the dynamics and the exponential growth of technology, the way technology is reorganizing what we do, and even the very challenge of the relevance of our skills, our knowledge, we cannot wish it away. We at UNCTAD firmly believe that in spite of the challenges and the critical importance of our traditional economies, we must quickly look at how can we bridge the gap. The gulf that's emerging on the digital front of innovation. To some, it looks like it's only the cutting edge for the most advanced that happens. And it will always remain like that. But when you look at the concrete micro steps you can take, it can make a whole lot of difference. 2 years ago, at our mandate giving conference in Nairobi, we agreed to strengthen support to developing countries in electronic commerce. Since then, we have done diagnostic studies for about 30 countries around the world. Most of them LDCs, but quite a few not LDCs, like Egypt, we just finished. I just signed with Prime Minister Hariri a similar study we are starting in Lebanon. We just got a grant from Islamic Development Bank to do one for Iraq. Basically, can we just look at where you are? How much are you ready for the fourth industrial revolution? How much are you ready for the global dynamics in the digital economy? Your broadband infrastructure, quality, and price. Your privacy laws, your regulations. If the Caribbean is talking about regional integration, you cannot avoid from the menu of negotiations cross-border digital trade. How can we create a common payment platform for electronic transactions across borders? When we started this in Africa, we were making jokes. I remember I said once that it takes a very bold man or woman to order things electronically from Nigeria and pay for them. Because it is click, pay, and pray. But since then, we've been making concrete steps. How can we liberate our transaction from prayer? You have to start fashioning it. In Eastern and Southern Africa, it's being driven partly by governments, but partly by fintech, by private companies. For example, Safaricom, the inventor of mobile money in the world, a Kenyan company, and MTN, the largest mobile service provider in Africa, are on their own creating a compatibility that you can procure a product in South Africa from Kenya and pay with your mobile money account of Safaricom, although in South Africa it's going to translate into rand. You already are ahead in fiscal transaction, but can you move from that analog platform? What are the challenges of making it possible for at least pooling electronic market in the Caribbean region? What are the challenges of a mismatch between only education system, but also, let me put it differently. Our investment in education is very important, not because of the labor market. Education is an end in itself for some of us. Having a literate population is an achievement you only appreciate if they were illiterate. But having said that, we have a need for certain level of skills to get into the services industry that is opened up by electronic possibilities. We have a need for teaching methods for a labor force that can constantly unlearn what it learned in school and learn new tools, reskilling and upskilling in order to remain relevant in rapidly changing world. You can't address this discourse with such a small population as countries alone. It has to be a collective way of dealing with this, because eventually, as you have limited opportunities for new market access in traditional economy, you have to look at intangible services as part of the new trade that you're going into. You have to look at how to optimize your genius in the creative industry, the home of dance hall and reggaeton, the home of unique food culture. Eventually, the doors for these creative industries are going to be unlocked by understanding how you can build on the electronic revolution, the digital revolution, on market access in these areas. This is the new trade of tomorrow. I'm sorry that I've gone on into very many different things, but I just wanted to say this, that we find that the dynamics of the world today are creating a new reason for us to get again together, re-engage together in defining what is the trajectory of transformation that is viable for developing countries. No part of the world can do it alone. Sometimes solidarity from almost similar situations will be critically important. Seeds alone cannot make the countries which are most subsidizing their fisheries, leading to the overexploitation of the commons, but also fisheries piracies in the territorial waters of the weaker countries. You cannot stop them on your own. It will call for greater solidarity, for a rule-based system to discipline and sustainable subsidies in fisheries, or even to deal with the malaise of plastic pollution of the oceans. So internationalism still survives. The absolute need for solidarities and the multilateral approach still survives. In the winter time of multilateralism, we have to build regional networks and value chains that will fashion us in good stead for when it becomes possible again to relink with others and pursue those goals that brought us together in the first place. Thank you for your attention.